Call whoever you want, Officer Daniel Brooks said with a lazy grin, the red and blue lights washing over the asphalt like a warning no one could ignore. And for a moment the entire street seemed to hold its breath, as if the night itself was waiting to see what she would do next. Alicia Carter stood there in the glow of a flickering street lamp, her navy scrubs still creased from a 12-hour hospital shift, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to her skin, her shoulders tired but her posture steady, her eyes calm in a way that didn't match the tension tightening the air around her. A patrol car idled behind Brooks, its engine humming low, radio static crackling softly through the open window. Another officer leaned casually against the hood, arms folded. Watching like this was just another routine stop, another story that would end the way they expected. Brooks tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was already a conclusion he'd written in his mind. Go ahead, he added, voice edged with amusement. Make the call. A few people lingered on the sidewalk across the street, their conversations fading into whispers, sneakers scuffing lightly against concrete as they slowed down but didn't leave. Drawn by the tension that hung thick as summer humidity, Alicia didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't try to explain herself again. Instead, she reached slowly into her pocket, the movement deliberate, controlled, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of her phone, the screen lighting up against the dim night as she unlocked it. Brooks let out a short laugh under his breath, glancing at his partner like they were sharing a private joke, like this was predictable, harmless, already over before it began. This should be good, the second officer muttered, shifting his weight, the metallic clink of his belt echoing softly in the quiet. Alicia lifted the phone to her ear, her expression unchanged, not defiant, not afraid, just present, as if she understood something no one else in that moment did. The ringtone pulsed once, twice, cutting cleanly through the low murmur of the city. A car passed in the distance, tires hissing against pavement. Then silence settled back in, heavier now, closer. Brooks' smile lingered, but something in his eyes flickered, just for a second, like a thought he couldn't quite place. Alicia didn't look at him, her gaze fixed somewhere ahead, beyond the flashing lights, beyond the uniforms, her breathing slow and even, the kind that comes from someone who has spent hours standing beside hospital beds, waiting through uncertainty without panic. The phone clicked softly as the line connected, and in that small, almost invisible moment, the energy shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. Like the air just before a storm changes direction. Brooks straightened slightly, his hand still resting near his belt, his posture confident, but no longer careless. Yeah, he said, a hint sharper now, watching her more closely. The radio crackled again, then fell quiet. Alicia spoke into the phone, her voice low, steady, measured, carrying no urgency, but no hesitation either, and whatever was said on the other end didn't echo into the street. Didn't need to, because something unseen had already begun moving. Something bigger than the moment, bigger than the flashing lights, or the quiet crowd, or the smirk that was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to fade from Officer Brooks' face. And for the first time since he'd stepped out of that patrol car, he wasn't entirely sure how this story was going to end. Alicia Carter had learned long ago that silence could carry more weight than words. And as she stood beneath the dim streetlight with the phone pressed gently to her ear, her mind did not race the way Officer Brooks expected it to. It did not scramble for excuses or search for approval. Instead, it moved with a quiet clarity shaped by years of showing up, where people were overlooked, unseen, unheard. Hours earlier, she had been inside St. Mary's Medical Center, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the steady rhythm of monitors filling the background as she checked vital signs and adjusted blankets for patients who barely noticed her presence. An elderly man had gripped her wrist before she left his room, his voice weak but sincere as he thanked her for staying when others rotated out, and she had simply nodded, offering a small smile, because she understood something most people did not, that being present without recognition was not weakness, it was discipline, it was strength. Now that same stillness settled over her as the night air cooled against her skin. A faint breeze carried the distant smell of food from a late-night diner down the block, mixing with the metallic scent of the city after a long day. Behind her, the patrol car lights continued their slow rotation, Red then blue then red again, reflecting off the windows of parked cars and the polished surface of a nearby storefront. Officer Brooks shifted his stance slightly, his boots scraping against the pavement in a small, impatient movement. He was used to control, used to reactions, raised voices, quick apologies, explanations that came too fast and too nervous, but Alicia gave him none of that. She did not rush. She did not fill the silence, and that absence of reaction began to press on him in a way he could not immediately explain. The second officer glanced toward Brooks, then back at Alicia, his earlier confidence softening into something more uncertain, as if he too could feel that the situation was no longer moving along a familiar path. A radio transmission crackled faintly from inside the patrol car, dispatch codes and clipped voices breaking through for a brief second before fading again. The sound lingered in the air like a reminder that not everything was as simple as it appeared. Alicia's grip on the phone remained steady, her fingers relaxed, her shoulders loose despite the long shift she had just finished. A strand of hair moved gently across her cheek in the breeze, and she brushed it back without urgency, her eyes focused forward, not avoiding the officers, but not engaging with them either, as if her attention was anchored somewhere deeper, somewhere beyond the moment unfolding in front of her. Brooks let out a small breath, not quite a laugh this time, more like a pause he had not intended, his jaw tightening slightly as he watched her, waiting for something, anything that would return the situation to something predictable. But nothing came. The quiet stretched, the city noises softened, even the people across the street seemed to lean in without moving closer, their presence forming a silent boundary around the scene. Alicia spoke again into the phone, her voice calm and precise, each word measured, not loud enough for the officers to fully catch, but steady enough that they knew this was not a call made out of panic. This was intentional, deliberate, and that realization settled into the space between them like a shift in gravity, subtle but undeniable. Brooks straightened a little more now, his earlier smirk fading into a thin line as he adjusted his stance, his hand moving away from his belt, as if instinctively creating distance from a situation he could no longer fully read. The flashing lights continued to pulse, but now they felt different, less like authority and more like a signal, something about to change, something already in motion. And Alicia Carter, still standing in her scrubs with the quiet weight of a long day behind her, did not look like someone asking for help. She looked like someone who had already decided exactly what would happen next. Officer Daniel Brooks had built his career on certainty, on the quiet assumption that he could read people within seconds, decide who mattered, who did not, who would comply and who might resist, and for years that instinct had served him well enough to move through long shifts without hesitation, without doubt. But as he stood there now beneath the wash of his own patrol lights, watching Alicia Carter hold that phone with a calm that refused to bend, something unfamiliar settled in the back of his mind. Not fear, not yet, but a subtle disruption in the pattern he relied on. He glanced briefly toward his partner, hoping for reinforcement, for the shared confidence that usually came without words, but the second officer did not meet his eyes this time. Instead, he shifted his gaze toward the patrol car, toward the radio, as if listening for something that had not been said yet. The city around them seemed to pull back even further, the usual rhythm of passing cars and distant voices, thinning into something quieter, more distant, as if the moment had narrowed into a single point of focus. Alicia's voice remained low and steady as she spoke into the phone, each word placed with intention, not hurried, not defensive. And though Brooks could not hear exactly what she was saying, he could hear how she was saying it, and that alone was enough to unsettle him, because it did not sound like someone asking for help. It sounded like someone reporting, documenting, confirming. The difference was small but unmistakable. Brooks adjusted his stance again, this time more noticeably, his shoulders tightening slightly as he reached up to his radio, pressing the button with a practiced motion, his voice controlled but carrying a new edge, requesting a routine status check from dispatch. The reply came back a second later, clipped and neutral, but there was a pause before it, just long enough to be felt, just long enough to register as something out of place. He released the button slowly, his eyes returning to Alicia, studying her more carefully now, taking in the details he had dismissed before, the hospital badge clipped to her pocket, the faint crease lines in her scrubs. The way she stood not with defiance but with quiet certainty, as if she understood the structure of this moment better than he did. Across the street, one of the onlookers shifted, pulling out a phone but not raising it yet. The hesitation mirroring the tension in the air, the flashing lights reflected off the glass of a nearby bus stop, creating a layered image of red and blue that seemed to pulse against Alicia's stillness. Brooks exhaled slowly, his earlier amusement gone now, replaced by a tightening focus. He was no longer performing for his partner or the small audience. Forming at the edges, he was recalculating, trying to find solid ground in a situation that had begun to shift without his permission. Alicia spoke again into the phone. A few words this time, shorter, precise, and then she listened, her expression unchanged, but there was a slight nod, almost imperceptible, as if acknowledging something confirmed on the other end. Brooks felt that movement more than he saw it, a quiet signal that whatever this was, it was not ending the way he had expected. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, the sound cutting through the stillness with a sharp clarity. He glanced down instinctively, his hand hovering for a fraction of a second before pressing the button, and in that brief pause, before any words came through, before any instructions were given, the certainty he had carried into this moment finally slipped, just enough for him to realize that he was no longer the one in control of how this would unfold. The radio finally broke through with a sharper tone than before, not the casual background chatter of routine calls, but something more direct, more deliberate, and Officer Daniel Brooks felt it immediately in the way his fingers tightened around the receiver. Unit 12, confirm your location. The voice said, controlled and precise, not rushed, but carrying a weight that did not belong to ordinary dispatch traffic. Brooks cleared his throat before responding, his voice steady out of habit, but missing the ease it had carried minutes earlier. He gave the street name, the block number, every detail crisp and by the book. There was a brief silence on the line afterward, not long enough to raise alarms for anyone else, but long enough for him to feel the shift deepen, like standing on ground that had just begun to move beneath the surface. Alicia remained where she was, phone still at her ear, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged. But now there was something else layered into the moment, something invisible but undeniable, as if two conversations were happening at once. One spoken and one understood without words. Brooks lowered the radio slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her again, no longer dismissing her as part of a routine stop, no longer certain of the role he had placed her in. The second officer pushed himself off the hood of the patrol car, standing a little straighter now, his posture no longer relaxed, his arms uncrossed as if preparing for something he could not yet name. The flashing lights continued their slow rotation, painting the scene in alternating colors that reflected off Alicia's phone screen, off the metal badge on Brooks' chest, off the glass windows lining the street, the entire space feeling contained, almost sealed. Brooks lifted the radio back to his mouth, about to speak again, but the voice returned first, cutting in with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. Unit 12, stand by, and do not proceed further. The instruction was simple, but it landed with a finality that made his grip tighten. His eyes flicked instinctively toward Alicia, then back to the radio. As if trying to connect 2 points that had suddenly aligned without his control, Alicia spoke quietly into her phone once more. A short confirmation, and then lowered it slowly, not with relief, not with urgency, just with the same measured calm she had carried from the beginning. Brooks felt the change settle fully now, not as a sudden shock, but as a realization unfolding piece by piece, the kind that did not need explanation because it was already happening. The second officer glanced at him, waiting for direction, but Brooks did not respond right away, his focus fixed on Alicia, on the stillness she maintained in the center of a moment that was no longer his to define. A car passed at the far end of the block, its headlights sweeping briefly across the scene before disappearing, leaving the red and blue lights to reclaim the space. The air felt cooler now, or maybe just heavier. Brooks lowered the radio slowly, his shoulders shifting as if adjusting to a weight he had not expected to carry. And for the first time since he had stepped out of his vehicle, he did not move forward, did not speak first, did not assert control. Instead he stood there, watching, waiting, as the structure of the moment continued to change around him. guided by something he could not see but could no longer ignore, and Alicia Carter, standing quietly under the streetlight with her phone now resting at her side, looked less like someone caught in a situation and more like someone who had already set its outcome into motion long before anyone else realized what was happening. The silence that followed the radio command did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like something waiting just beneath the surface, and Officer Daniel Brooks felt it settle into his chest as he stood there with the receiver still in his hand, his training telling him to regain control, to redirect the situation, but the instruction he had just heard left no room for improvisation. Stand by and do not proceed. It echoed in his mind with a clarity that did not fade, the kind of order that did not come without reason. He shifted his weight slightly, the leather of his duty belt creaking faintly, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the stillness. Across from him, Alicia Carter remained exactly where she was, her phone now lowered at her side, her fingers relaxed around it, her shoulders no longer carrying the fatigue of a long shift, but something steadier, something anchored, as if the moment had aligned with her expectations rather than surprised her. Brooks glanced briefly down the street, then back at her, searching for something that would explain what was happening, something visible, something he could point to and say this is why. But there was nothing obvious, no approaching vehicles, no sudden movement, just the same quiet block under the same rotating lights. And yet everything felt different. The second officer cleared his throat softly, stepping half a pace closer, his voice lower now, uncertain in a way Brooks had not heard from him before. "What is going on?" he asked, not loudly, not demanding, just seeking clarity. Brooks did not answer right away, his focus still fixed on Alicia, as if the answer might be written somewhere in the way she stood. In the calm that had not cracked even once since the interaction began, a faint sound of footsteps came from the sidewalk as one of the bystanders shifted position, the scrape of a shoe against concrete marking the only movement in an otherwise frozen scene. Alicia lifted her eyes slightly, meeting Brooks' gaze for the first time without hesitation, not challenging, not submissive, simply present, and in that brief connection something passed between them, not spoken, not explained, but understood on a level that did not require words. Brooks felt it in the tightening of his jaw, in the way his earlier certainty had fully dissolved into something else, something closer to awareness. He lowered his hand from the radio slowly, letting it rest against his side, the device still warm against his palm. The red and blue lights continued their steady pulse, but now they felt less like authority and more like a backdrop to something larger unfolding. Alicia took a slow breath, the movement subtle but visible, her chest rising and falling evenly. And then she shifted her weight just slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply adjusting her stance as if settling into a position she had chosen from the beginning. Brooks watched that small movement carefully, his mind running through possibilities, through procedures, through everything he knew about how situations like this were supposed to go, and realizing that none of it applied anymore. The radio crackled again, softer this time, a follow-up tone without words, like a signal waiting to be answered. Brooks hesitated for a fraction of a second before lifting it again, his voice lower now, more controlled, acknowledging the standby instruction, confirming compliance, and as he spoke the words, he felt the shift complete, not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable. The moment was no longer his to shape. The authority he had relied on had been interrupted by something unseen but absolute. Alicia Carter remained still beneath the streetlight, her presence calm, unshaken, and for the first time Brooks understood that whatever had been set in motion when she made that call was not about proving a point, it was about revealing one, and he was only just beginning to see it unfold. The night seemed to settle into a deeper quiet, not the absence of sound but the presence of something unspoken, something that pressed gently against every movement and every breath. And Alicia Carter stood in the center of it with a stillness that felt almost out of place against the restless glow of the patrol lights. The red and blue reflections moved across her face in slow rhythm, catching the edges of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the faint sheen of exhaustion that had not yet left her. After hours on her feet inside the hospital, but beneath that fatigue there was something else, something grounded, something that did not shift even as the air around her changed. Officer Daniel Brooks remained a few feet away, his posture no longer rigid with control, but not fully relaxed either, caught somewhere in between, as if his body had not yet decided how to respond to a situation that had quietly moved beyond him. His radio rested against his chest now, silent but present, a reminder that the instructions he had received were still in effect, still shaping the boundaries of what he could and could not do. The second officer stood slightly behind him, no longer leaning, no longer observing with casual detachment. His stance mirrored Brooks in a way that suggested uncertainty had replaced assumption. Across the street, the small group of onlookers had grown just enough to be noticed, but no one stepped forward. No one spoke loudly, their presence forming a quiet perimeter around the moment, drawn not by spectacle but by the feeling that something important was unfolding without needing to be announced. A soft breeze moved through the block, lifting loose papers near the curb, brushing lightly against Alicia's scrubs, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic and the faint echo of a siren far away. The world continuing as it always did, unaware of the shift taking place on this single stretch of pavement. Alicia lowered her gaze briefly, not in submission but in thought, her fingers adjusting their grip on the phone as if confirming its weight, its presence. Then she looked up again, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, present. Brooks watched her carefully, his earlier instinct to speak first now replaced by a hesitation that felt unfamiliar. He had spent years filling silence with authority, with direction, with decisions made quickly and confidently. But now the silence held him in place, not forcing him to act, but preventing him from acting without understanding. And that understanding had not yet arrived. The radio on his shoulder gave a faint click, not a full transmission, just enough to remind him that something was still connected, still listening. He resisted the urge to reach for it again, to break the quiet, to regain a sense of control through movement or words, because something in the stillness told him that doing so would not return things to how they were. It would only reveal further how much had already changed. Alicia took another slow breath, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that remained consistent, unaffected by the tension around her. And in that small, steady motion there was a kind of strength that did not demand attention but held it anyway. The flashing lights continued to pulse, but now they felt distant, almost secondary to the quiet presence she carried. Brooks shifted his stance slightly, not forward, not back, just enough to release the stiffness in his shoulders, and as he did, he realized that the moment had reached a point where no one needed to raise their voice. No one needed to assert anything out loud, because whatever had been set in motion when Alicia made that call was now fully present, shaping the space between them without needing explanation. And for the first time since the interaction began, the power in the situation did not belong to the one with the badge or the uniform. It rested quietly with the woman who had chosen not to react, not to argue, but simply to stand and let the truth unfold in its own time. The radio came alive again, this time with a clarity that cut clean through the stillness, not loud, not rushed, but unmistakably direct. Unit 12. The voice said, no longer neutral, no longer routine, and Officer Daniel Brooks felt it immediately in the way his spine straightened without thinking, in the way his grip on the receiver tightened just slightly before he even pressed the button. Confirm you are with Alicia Carter. The words landed with precision, and for a brief second the world seemed to narrow around that name. Brooks blinked once, the question not matching anything he had reported, not matching anything he had expected. He pressed the radio, his voice controlled but edged with something new. Affirmative, he replied, and there was no hesitation on the other end this time, no pause. Only a response that followed immediately. Stand down. Do not engage further. Internal Affairs has been notified and is actively monitoring this interaction. The words did not echo, they did not need to, they settled into the air with a finality that shifted everything at once. Brooks felt it in his chest, in the way his shoulders dropped just slightly, in the way the structure he had relied on only minutes ago rearranged itself without asking for his agreement. He lowered the radio slowly, his eyes moving back to Alicia, seeing her now not as a variable in a routine stop, but as the center of something far more deliberate. The second officer exhaled quietly beside him, the tension in his stance easing into something closer to awareness. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say that had not already been decided elsewhere. Alicia met Brooks' gaze again, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, not triumphant, not confrontational, simply present. As if she had always known this moment would arrive exactly like this. The flashing lights continued their steady rhythm, but now they felt distant, almost irrelevant against the weight of what had just been revealed. Brooks shifted his weight, the movement slower now, more measured, his earlier confidence replaced by a careful awareness of every action, every word. He took a small step back, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just enough to create space where before there had been pressure. And that single step carried more meaning than anything he could have said out loud. Across the street the onlookers remained still, their presence quiet but attentive, as if they too had felt the shift without needing to hear the details. Alicia lowered her phone fully now, her hand resting at her side, her posture relaxed but grounded, and in that moment she did not look like someone who had just changed the course of an interaction. She looked like someone who had simply allowed the truth to surface. Brooks glanced briefly at his partner, then back at Alicia, his jaw tightening before easing again, the need to assert control gone, replaced by something closer to recognition. The radio remained silent after the command. No further instructions, no follow-up, because none were needed. The outcome had already been set, and as the quiet settled back over the street, deeper now, steadier, Brooks understood something he had not considered before. That authority did not always announce itself through volume or force. Sometimes it arrived in silence, in patience, in the refusal to react until the right moment revealed itself. And Alicia Carter, standing beneath the soft glow of the streetlight, had not taken power from him. She had simply shown him that it had never belonged to him in the way he thought it did. The weight of the moment did not break all at once. It eased, slowly, like tension releasing from a wire that had been pulled too tight, and Officer Daniel Brooks stood there under the fading pulse of the patrol lights, aware now of every small detail he had overlooked before, the quiet steadiness in Alicia Carter's posture, the absence of fear in her eyes, the deliberate calm in the way she held herself even when the situation had been tilted against her. He let out a slow breath, the kind that did not announce itself but carried the shift of a decision being made internally. His shoulders lowered just enough to show it, his stance no longer defensive, no longer authoritative, simply present, and that change did not go unnoticed. His partner glanced at him briefly, then followed his lead, stepping back half a pace, creating a space that had not existed earlier, a space that signaled something unspoken but clear. Brooks looked at Alicia again, really looked this time, not through assumption, not through habit, but with a recognition that settled in quietly. He cleared his throat, the sound soft against the stillness, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the earlier edge, none of the dismissive tone that had started it all. "Ma'am," he said, the word measured, respectful, not forced, just different. "You are free to go." The sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had shifted to make it possible. Alicia did not respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because there was no need to rush. She held his gaze for a brief second longer, as if confirming that the moment had truly settled, that there was nothing left hidden beneath the surface. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not in agreement, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, the kind that required no words to be understood. Brooks reached down and adjusted the position of his radio on his chest, a subtle movement, grounding, as if resetting himself within a reality that felt clearer now than it had minutes before. The flashing lights continued to rotate, but their presence felt quieter, less dominant, as if the scene no longer belonged to them. Across the street the onlookers began to shift, not dispersing all at once, but slowly, their attention easing as the tension dissolved. Conversations resumed in low voices, footsteps moving again along the sidewalk, the city returning to its usual rhythm. Alicia turned slightly, the motion smooth and unhurried, her scrubs catching the soft light as she moved, her phone resting naturally in her hand, not as a tool anymore, but simply as an object she no longer needed to hold onto with purpose. Brooks watched her for a moment, not out of authority, but out of something closer to reflection, his expression neutral but quieter, more aware. He opened his mouth as if to say something more, then paused, realizing that whatever needed to be said had already been said through action, through silence, through the shift that had unfolded without force. He closed his mouth again, letting the moment remain intact. Alicia took a step forward, then another, her pace steady, unhurried, as if she had never been stopped at all. And as she moved past the edge of the flashing lights, the colors faded from her figure, replaced by the softer glow of the street lamps further down the block. Brooks stood where he was, his partner beside him, both of them quieter now, not diminished, but changed in a way that did not need to be explained. The radio remained silent. The street returned to its normal flow, and in the space where tension had once filled the air, there was now only the quiet understanding that something had been corrected, not through confrontation, not through escalation, but through a simple, steady refusal to be anything less than composed, and that had been enough. Alicia. Carter did not look back as she walked down the block, her steps steady against the pavement, the soft rhythm of her shoes blending into the quiet return of the city's night. The flashing lights behind her grew dimmer with each step, fading into reflections on distant windows until they were no longer part of her world. The street ahead was lined with warm street lamps casting long shadows that stretched and moved with her, the air cooler now, carrying the faint hum of late traffic and the distant sound of a train somewhere beyond the buildings. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, a small, familiar motion that grounded her back into the simple reality of her own life. A long shift completed, a quiet walk home, nothing extraordinary on the surface, and yet something had shifted, not around her, but within the space she had just left behind. Back at the patrol car, Officer Daniel Brooks remained still for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes following the direction Alicia had gone, though she was already blending into the distance. The weight of the interaction settling into him not as embarrassment or anger, but as something quieter, something that asked to be understood rather than dismissed. His partner shifted beside him, breaking the stillness with a soft exhale, the kind that signaled the end of something without needing to name it. Brooks finally moved, reaching up to turn off the overhead lights, the red and blue fading out completely, leaving the street in its natural color once again. The sudden absence of flashing light made everything feel clearer, simpler, as if the moment had been contained within that glow and was now released. He looked down briefly at his radio, then back at the empty stretch of street, the instructions he had received still echoing in his mind, not as a reprimand, but as a reminder, something that would stay with him longer than the shift itself. The bystanders had already dispersed, their presence gone as quietly as it had formed, leaving no trace except the memory of a moment witnessed and understood without explanation. Brooks walked back toward the driver's side door, his steps slower now, more deliberate. He paused before getting in, resting his hand lightly on the frame of the car, his reflection faintly visible in the darkened window, not the version of himself from earlier in the night, but one that had seen something different, something that could not be unseen. Across the block, Alicia reached the corner, the glow of a crosswalk signal illuminating her briefly as she stopped, waiting, her posture relaxed, her breathing even. She did not rush, did not look back, because there was nothing left behind that needed her attention. When the signal changed, she stepped forward, crossing into the next street, disappearing fully from view, her presence leaving no noise, no disruption, only a quiet shift in the space she had passed through. Back at the patrol car, Brooks slid into his seat, the door closing with a muted sound. His partner followed, neither of them speaking as the engine idled softly, the radio silent now. The night returning to its usual rhythm, Brooks rested his hands on the steering wheel, staring ahead for a moment before pulling away from the curb, the tires rolling forward smoothly, merging back into the flow of the city. And as the patrol car moved down the street, there was no announcement, no conclusion spoken out loud, only the quiet understanding that something had been corrected without force, without noise, through nothing more than patience, clarity, and the kind of strength that did not need to prove itself. And long after the lights had faded and the street had returned to normal, that understanding remained, steady and undeniable, like a silence that carried its own truth.